Welcome back to Teaching Orchestra. In this episode, I'm going to be taking a look at some of the stylized bowings in Dorian Variations by Mark Williams. And I'm going to be going out of order, and I'm just going to cut right to the chase because we're just all really wanting to get how to do brushstrokes. And if your orchestra can play brushstrokes well, they can really sound impressive if you have good tone, which I covered in my last video, and good style. The emphasis here is on beat 4, which I think is really cool. And there's a tie over to beat 1, which I think is even cooler because that's not very common in music, especially not at this level, where usually the emphasis is on beat 1. That's the strongest beat. So I really like this writing. I think it's cool, and I think it'll solve a lot of the misphrasings that our younger musicians tend to play with. And it'll make it a lot more interesting because beat 1 is de-emphasized instead of emphasized, and younger musicians tend to just emphasize every beat 1, the whole piece. And that's part of the magic behind Dorian Variations because they can be taught the technique to make it sound great, but the musicianship behind it and the excitement that they can put into it because of the way it's written makes this a really great contest piece. So wow, good stuff, right? So how do we pull this off? First of all, they have to know how to get off the string. And if you want to teach your kids how to do basic brushstrokes, go to Season 1, Episode 7, and I go into a lot of detail that's well beyond the scope of this video, but that'll get them the basics of how to get off the string. It's going to help the exercise that I have in the teaching companions go a lot more smoothly. We start talking about brushstroke progressions. So here's what I do. First, we start practicing getting off the string. So we just do down, up, and then we get off the string, and then we set it, and then we get back on the string, we play. And then we do it again and again, and we get really good at this because we're not just going through this teaching companion literally, right? We make sure we can do it on open D, then we try it on open G, then we might want to take this and go back to the finger patterns and see if we can do it up the pattern, down the pattern on multiple strings. Just getting really good at progression 1. Then when we're good at that, we go to progression 2, all right? So we go down, up, get off the string and set. We only have 1 beat to do it now. We don't have 2 beats, and then we got to set here. Do it again and again. Get really good because progression 3 is a lot harder. Down, up, down. We don't have a rest. We just have the brushstroke, and then we got to set the string, grip it, and get ready for that 4th beat. Stay with these. Really learn them well. Do them with left hand exercises too. Make sure they're in tune. Make sure you grip the string. Don't cheat, especially for progression 3. You have to brush, set, and go. If they can't do it on an open D, they can't play the Allegro moderato. So go back to progression 2, keep working on it, then you can add style. Really grip the string to get the accent to come out. Let the brush note ring too. When you add some left hand, when you add some vibrato to that brush stroke, that's like the orchestra version of the chef's kiss. Okay, what about hooked bows? In my teaching companion, I do this with rhythm number 5, but you don't want to start with rhythm number 5. You want to make sure that they can bow dotted half notes at this tempo and get good with using their bows, and then you can try to teach them the hooked bows. Now, how do you want to play rhythm number 5? Like, what style do you want to use? It's up to you, but it's marked portato. If you want to use Loré instead, make it broader. You know, the difference is going to be the amount of space in between the notes. So no space, that's going to be more of the Loré side. And if you want to add space, that's going to be more on the portato side. But whichever style you're doing, you're going to need to re-articulate, all right? Well, they need to re-articulate, but that doesn't mean they're going to. Now, if you're doing the Loré bowing, they're probably going to have to articulate. Otherwise, it's just going to sound like a dotted half note. And you might want to teach them that to begin with first, even if you're going to end up using the portato in performance because it provides that accountability. With the Loré, the bow slows down, but it doesn't ever come to a complete stop. And if they can't articulate, go back to my previous video and I talk about stuff like rosin and weight, which really help. If you play portato and you stop the bow, your students can separate the notes and create space without re-articulating. It's possible for them to do it, but it sounds horrible. So how do you tell who's gripping the string and who's cheating? Look at the bows. You should see their bows flexing when they articulate beat 3 at the camber. You can't hide it. They're either doing it or they aren't. And while I'm on this topic, make sure that your student's bow hair isn't too tight. At this level, it's really common to have bow hair that's way too tight, and it's going to make things really tricky, like retakes, Larray bowings, a lot of other techniques too. And your students need every advantage they can get, so please hold them accountable. Have their stand partners check their bows and see how much distance is between the camber and the bow hair, and is their bow curved? That's a thing. If their bow's straight, that's a big deal. One thing I really like about this edition is bow placement indicators. We've got these all over the place, the LH, the UH, and it does a really good job of saying where are we in the bow, and I think that's really handy. The editor, James, did a really good job here. And he's very thorough, and it's going to make this a lot easier. I typically have to go through the parts and bow through it and figure all this stuff out myself, and this really saves a lot of time. It's like putting the measure numbers on the score. It's not essential, and I wouldn't refuse to buy a piece because of it, but it's convenient when it's there. And these markings, which are in the parts too, by the way, and I followed that example, and I put the LH in the teaching companion so that they can start in the lower half of the bow when going through these rhythms, and they can really solidify bow placement. Now, LH is lower half. It's not the frog, it's the lower half, all right? They probably want to start around the balance point, the actual balance point, not the dynamic balance point, because they don't want to be too high up in the bow. They don't want to be too low in the bow. They just want that Goldilocks spot. All right, good stuff. In my next video, I'm going to be going over fourth finger technique, and I hope to see you then.